Howard as an institution and many of these Black organizations have always been on this caravan to social justice. Here we had partners who were willing to join, and that's great. People have always joined our caravan, but they've always left with a guarantee to leave. So my attitude from the very beginning was like, okay, great, we're going to make space for them to join, but we're also going to be clear. This time when they leave, they're going to leave us with gas, new tires, new carburetor, new engine. We're going to take all the resources we can and make our caravan that much better for the long haul because they're going to leave. There's no doubt about it, but we still have a destination in mind.
Hey friends, and welcome to the Next Best Thing podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Klein-Thomas. Now, I'm here to help you create strategies to navigate all of your career and life transitions. And as we like to say around here, a pivot and a plan B are what? Not required. That's right. Now, before we dive in, if you could please just take a moment, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Not only will it ensure that you never miss an episode, it also helps to get this great content in front of other people. Also, do you know we have a newsletter, Next Nuggets? It is out here in the world. And it's where I share gems from this podcast and provide you with additional resources to get you from where you are to where you want to be. Go to the Next Best Thing, ACT.com, scroll to the bottom and sign up. Again, the website, the Next Best Thing, ACT.com. Check the show notes for a direct link. I got a question. So, what do actors Chadwick Boseman, Felicia Rashad, and Anthony Anderson, along with journalists Nicole Hannah-Jones and Ta-Nehisi Coates, what do they all have in common? Howard University. If that was your guess, you are right. They were all brought into the fold under the leadership of former university president, Dr. Wayne Frederick. Now, Dr. Frederick first stepped onto campus as a 16-year-old student from Trinidad and Tobago, thus starting what he called a more than 30-year love affair with the HBCU. He received 3 degrees from Howard and is a trained surgeon. But in 2013, Dr. Frederick became the interim president and assumed the position in its full capacity the following year, when Howard was facing major financial challenges. This is how university leaders describe that time.
The question wasn't how big can you dream? The question was how can you keep the lights on?
Howard, both the university and the hospital, was in financial distress, losing money with no clear path to financial stability. Our assets were not being managed well or optimized. There was no clear vision for the future, and our strategy needed to be overhauled.
You know, sometimes your next will have you going through difficult times, but it's so important to create a clear vision. You need to build trusted relationships, and you got to perform. You have to make good on your promises. Dr. Frederick embodies all of that and so much more. In this episode, he is breaking all of that down and sharing a little bit more about how he's navigating his own personal next best thing. Take a listen. Oh, Dr. Frederick, your amazing reputation precedes you. I'm just really happy to get a chance to speak with you. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Yeah. Now, this podcast is all about navigating career and life transitions. So we're not going to go chronologically as we kind of discussed before we hit record. I've kind of done some research and have some themes that I want to talk to you about that I think that all of us can learn from through your experiences. So I really wanted to start with a story about Anthony Anderson, the Blackish actor that everybody knows him from Blackish, and your role in getting him to come back to Howard. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, sure. Anthony Anderson, like so many Howard alum back in the day, had different opportunities, just like Sean Combs, who it's tough for me to call him P. Diddy, knowing if it's Sean Combs. They left for opportunities that they had in industry and have been very successful, but, always have maintained wanting to have a Howard degree. And so his son was getting ready to apply to college. And I remember him calling me up and telling me, he'd like to have his son take a tour. His wife also was a Howard alum. And so when I met with he and his son, I kind of pulled him aside and I said, what about you? What are you doing about, your own degree completion? And he said, Doc, I'm interested. It would be great if I could be done when he's done, et cetera. And so, we worked on it, gave him a schedule of things that he had to do, classes he had to take, and he jumped right in, to his credit. So, incredible story. And I'm very, very happy for him. Every time I see him, of course, he reminds me, and I think having my signature on his degree meant a lot to him.
Yeah, I mean, he was very happy about the degree. He went on late night shows with his degree, showing it off. But I think that I wanted to start that way. From what I understand, you had his transcript, right?
Yeah, that's right. I had pulled his transcript when they came for the visit. So I pulled him aside, away from his family, and just I told him, "Listen, I've looked into this, and there are things you could do to get this done. And so, let's go at it." And he was, to his credit, he was very interested. I mean, he didn't bat an eye. He didn't tell me about all the recording things he had to do, and I mean, it was none of that, And we've had some experience with that at Howard. At least during my tenure, I've had some experience. Nick Cannon took classes while going back and forth from the West Coast to the East Coast and got his degree while I was there as well. Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's now on faculty, he actually had never completed his degree, so he's now working on that. He's actually taking classes while teaching classes.
Wow.
Yeah, lots of unique stories with folks who are well known and who've been successful already.
And I bring that up because I think that one of your power strengths, like your superpower, is really making connections, kind of one at a time, one person at a time, really making deep, meaningful connections. How do you approach building authentic relationships?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think at baseline I'm a shy guy, but I have gotten close to folks like him when Chadwick Boseman was alive, Steph Curry, and I would say it comes from a simple thematic that I have, and that is that every single day when we get up, we have an opportunity to amplify other people's humanity. And I think that that's been my philosophy. I feel university should embody that even more so than anybody else. But as individuals, we should embody it. And what that means to me is I'm not here to respect somebody else's existence. And I think sometimes what we do is we avoid people, avoid getting to know them well enough, avoid getting to influence their lives. And we feel that that's politically correct, and therefore that's not bothering anybody. It's kind of live and let live. My version of that is, I want to meet as many people. I want to figure out where they are, what they're doing. And if I could be helpful, I want to get involved. And so that's been my philosophy. And so I think with, regardless of whether it's the 18-year-old student coming from Montgomery, Alabama, who is now an emancipated individual out of the foster care system, or it's an Anthony Anderson or Steph Curry, I try to connect, personally, and really try to build that relationship out based on who they are and what they present to me.
Yeah, and those relationships really go a long way. When you came to Howard, it was a difficult time. Like, of course, Howard has a storied history, the storied tradition, but when you came, it was financially both the university and the hospital were not doing well financially. They were operating at a deficit. What's the first order of business when you come to solve those problems, right? Like it's so glaring. Before you can really do much of anything else, you got to get the financial house and foundation in order. What's the first order of business?
So the first order of business is what I do I've done all my surgical career, right? When I'm in the operating room and the patient is bleeding to death, I don't get to throw instruments and stomp my feet. And so the first thing is to focus. I got to focus on where the problem is. And what we usually do in that circumstance is we try to stop the hemorrhage, right? We try to put a clamp in it and just stop the bleeding, clean up the area, assess what else is going on. And then based on that, systematically, we go about trying to either repair a vessel or do whatever we have to do. And so I did the same thing. I kind of looked at what is the major issue here. The hospital was one. It was losing money. It was a major part of the revenue stream for the university. So that was sliding away. I would say our academics weren't the best. So our graduation rate was low. I'd say morale was low, faculty pay was low. So there was several things. We had crumbling buildings. And so systematically, I then had to assess all of these things that were potentially going wrong and start, one by one going after them. And that's what I did. And I think one of the reasons that, I feel like I had a successful tenure was because our diagnostic acumen around what needed to be fixed was on point, and I think then being able to sequence it flowed from that. And so it was a lot to do. I remember when I first made my assessment, I was like, just about everything is broken. But I felt that some of the things we could do in parallel, we could juggle some of the balls together. Some of the balls we just couldn't put in the air until we got into a better financial situation. So philanthropy, for instance, was non-existent, for the better part. But before we could get to that, I had to get the finances and the other things in order. And so that was an example of something that we delayed, really jumping into for 2-3 years, but gave ourselves time to get everything else fixed.
Even when things aren't going well, or, there's a issue or a problem, people are still comfortable in that problem, right? So how do you get people to come into the trenches with you and saying, all right, this is what my idea is for the future, because I really do believe, like, so this is all about, navigating your career and life transitions. And I really do believe that part of it is getting people to buy into your vision for what your future is. And so how do you get people to come into the trenches with you for this vision that everybody hopes for, right? And there's, financial solvency, it's a quantitative measure, right? It's not qualitative. But yet, how do you get them to get in the trenches with you to work on it together to go towards that same goal?
Yeah, it's another great question. So the first thing that I do is I think that there are myths either in our lives or in our institutions that we live on. And Howard is a classic example, has an incredible legacy, without a doubt. But at the same time, people lived on that legacy. People never were willing to question, well, okay, this was great 50 years ago, 60 years ago, but is it really great today? And so the first thing I did was just spoke to the uncomfortable truths. That doesn't always make you popular. But I think if you start there, people are like, okay, this guy is really leveling with us. He's not trying to sell us on something that doesn't exist. And once you gain that trust from the perspective of, listen, this is what our reality is, then I think it puts you in a much better place. And once you get to you start getting to that better place, you start functioning in a better way. But you have to start, I think, with the real truths. And at Howard especially, there are lots of myths. I mean, there's so many things, big and small, that are myths. One of them is homecoming. I listen to people talk about homecoming from back in my day.
Yeah.
And they talk about when Biggie Smalls and P. Diddy came on campus, and everybody that I meet from that era says that they were there. And I say to them, there's a YouTube video that shows that there probably were 50 people there. So I don't know how these thousands of people. So when they reference homecoming was always lit, to use the young people's term, I'm like, well, I don't know if 50 people constitutes a big stage show, on a little platform stage. I mean, come on. So that's an example where, sometimes the myths don't allow people to let go of where they are so that they can go to where they need to be, because they have a false sense of where they really are. So I always start with trying to bust the myths.
Yeah. And, I also believe in when you're going into your next, not everybody can come. Not everybody can come. Not everybody is ready for the new season. So how did you reconcile that?
So there's a saying I once read, and I believe it's anonymous, and it's that God created all animals differently. And as a result, when you look at animals on a mountain, they exist at different places on the mountain. And there's danger in taking an animal from the bottom of the mountain to the top. You might actually kill it because its lungs don't adapt, etc. Now, my version of it is slightly different. And my version is that I still believe everybody could get to the top, but they may have to take a circuitous route. There's some animals that may have to adapt over weeks and months, and they have to go around the mountain, in a spiral fashion to get to the top, and not just take a direct route. And so my version of it is to recognize where everybody is, to give everybody the vision of getting to the top, to recognize, as you pointed out, everybody can't necessarily come together, but we're going to give everybody an opportunity to get there. So we're going to create different pathways for people to get there, and those who are willing to adapt and change, we'll welcome them there. But we have to recognize that some people may never make it. But I think you're absolutely right. Not everybody can go into that next season with you, and sometimes that's not your decision. Sometimes that's a decision that other people make because of where you're going. They're either apprehensive or scared or unsure of themselves, and so you have to let them go.
But with an institution with such a storied tradition and and being a part of it, being a member of it, whether you graduated or not, whether you went to the homecoming or not, you know what I mean? Whether you went there or not, just having that proximity to that institution carries so much weight, especially in the Black community.
Yeah.
How are you able to reconcile that when you're like, no, like for us to survive for another 100 years, we got to make some tough decisions right now. And that includes who's going to be there along that road.
Yeah, I think with that, you have to get your North Star. You have to set the bar as to where you want to go. And my bar was that we were among the elite institutions in America, not just based on legacy, but based on our contemporary experience. And so with that being the case, I recognize that not everybody is going to come to that. Some people see that as an elitism, type of perspective. And so they don't want to come with you. But what you have to do is you have to create opportunities where they can all be cheerleaders or all be contributors in their own little way. And so for some people, they don't want the high academic performing because they don't see themselves getting in when they were, when in this current time, they don't see it. So you have to convince them that, listen, okay, that's great. That's fine. But let's be clear. We're going to create a pathway to give some people opportunity. We just can't do it to the extent that we did it in the past because we have more high academic performing students. I think you have to really be malleable around speaking to everybody, every constituent, and trying to get them to see a role that they could play in realizing that dream, and I think that that's the way. So not everyone needs to, like I said, be at the top of the mountain. There's no top of the mountain if there's no base or bottom of the mountain. And so you've got to get people to populate all different levels of the mountain and show them that there's value in their position everywhere along that mountain.
Yeah. And using that mountain analogy, what role does storytelling play in transformation, both internally and externally?
Storytelling, I think, is critical because when people can identify with something, they're far more likely to support it in the way that it should be supported. And that storytelling does not have to be stories that immediately resonate with each of them. Being a Howard alum, it's very easy for me to tell stories because I've seen the place at different stages of its life. And my own life has been very much determined by my Howard experience, right? I'm a triple alum. All three of those degree opportunities came with a very different circumstance every single time. And so my ability to, tell that story and to get people to relate to that. There are people who went to school with me who also know that if I was lined up among the incoming freshmen, which was over 2,100, I'd probably be at the back of the pack if you had to pick somebody who would go on to be the president of Howard University.
Really?
Absolutely. I didn't participate in student government. I was 5'6", 88 pounds when I started at Howard.
You were also 16 years old, so
I was a pretty shy kid. So, even that transformation for them, as far as they could see, they started this race where I was, and so as far as they could see, I'm one of them as well. So that storytelling is key, and it's key to different constituents in terms of how they receive it, et cetera. But I think it's really important.
Yeah. And I think it's important to say that when you left, the university had $2 billion in assets and revenue greater than $1 billion. So kudos to you. I mean, that's no small feat. That's no small feat at all.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't.
And what were you telling yourself, though, personally during this time? As a leader during this time, you have to put on a face, to get through this. It's like the only way is through it. And you have to show up in a certain way. So, because everyone's looking to you as to how to feel about this and how to keep going. What were you telling yourself?
The beginning was rough because I would say my outward displays were very cautious. In other words, I tried to let people know we had a grave situation, but still leave them with some hope. I
Hmm.
had a mentor, Dr. LaFord, who used to describe hope as the anticipation of tomorrow. And he used to describe it as that in the context of being a cancer surgeon. But if you think of our daily lives, you think of an institutional life, ultimately that hope is the anticipation of tomorrow because you anticipate that tomorrow is going to be better.
Hmm.
And so what I focused on was more the tomorrow that was going to be better versus the today and yesterday that was really bad. With my board, I was very clear that the today and yesterday is very bad. But what we're going to focus on is making a better tomorrow. And I would say midway through to about maybe 2/3 through my tenure, once we really got traction, things were working, the credit ratings were going up, et cetera, the finances were clearly much better. Then I could really start being even bolder about the bigger aspiration. And that's where you really get into, I think, the major inspiring, the things
Hmm.
that people would never think of themselves, right? Howard being an R1 institution, Howard winning a UARC. I mean, that's when all of those things really started to come on strong because we now had a lot of credibility for
Hmm.
people to say, well, listen, he dug us out of a hole. We're now on land and surface, and he wants to, go up that mountain, and we're going to go.
No, that's great. That's great. I want to switch gears just a little bit to talk about Black culture. Black culture influences everything. It determines what's cool, what's marketable. But oftentimes, Black people don't benefit from it, from profit from, our own genius. It's stolen, repackaged, and has been making other people rich. So in 2020, after George Floyd's murder, we saw a lot of corporations finally recognizing HBCUs,
Mhm.
Howard being chief among them. How did you really navigate that time and really white corporate interest to make sure that their interest was genuine and that was going to be a long standing commitment and not just satisfying optics? How did you
Yeah,
navigate that?
that's a great question. So the first part of navigating that was recognizing that Howard as an institution and many of these Black organizations have always been on this caravan to social justice.
Hmm.
Here we had partners who were willing to join, and that's great. People have always joined our caravan, but they've always left with a guarantee to leave. So my attitude from the very beginning was like, okay, great, we're going to make space for them to join, but we're also going to be clear. This time when they leave, they're going to leave us with gas, new tires, new carburetor, new engine. We're going to take all the resources we can and make our caravan that much better for the long haul because they're going to leave. There's no doubt about it. But we still have a destination in mind. But this is going to make our
Ah.
journey a little bit better. And so that's what I focused on. And sure enough, when they started leaving, we weren't hurt because we had ensured that we made our point. And the other thing is, they all left very differently this time, in my opinion. They
Mhm.
left with their own consciousness at least awakened to the issues. Whether they deny the issues, whether they don't do anything about it, is very different from them recognizing that there are issues. So even today, when you look at pre George Floyd's murder, the giving to social justice issues, philanthropic giving to social justice issues, is now back today at a level lower than it was pre George Floyd's murder. It peaked in 2021 and has quickly dissipated. All the
Mhm.
fears of inflation, potential recession, they used every excuse to start pulling their resources and pulling away, as I had predicted they would, and that's no surprise to me. But I am confident that they have left with a different level of conscientiousness about it, and hopefully, in their own private ways, they are still supporting people individually, but they definitely are not supporting the system to the level that they should be.
When you're talking about, I love that caravan example. I've never thought about it that way. I think that's so good. So what does that actually look like more tangibly of like, okay, they're going to leave. They're going to leave, but let's, leave us in a better position, to move forward. What does that look like in terms of leaving gas and leaving tires and things of that nature?
Yeah, that means investing in our institutions structurally, not just, we're going to hire a few kids here, but really looking at what our major issues are. So some of that is physical infrastructure, some of that is system infrastructure,
Mm.
um, building collaborations that would allow us to flourish and to work with one another. I think that's critical as well. Using us as thought leaders. One of the things that Howard tried to build out during this period was a type of executive retreat and training for major corporations where they could bring their CEOs and their C-suite to campus for a couple of days and spend it with our students, right? So something that's ongoing, that's going to keep the issue in front of them. And I think those are the types of things that constitute gas and tires and
Hmm.
so on, because they have some long-term sustainability to them that will continue to pay dividends versus, you hire 4 kids this year and that's it. We don't hear from you again. What I mean? We
Yeah.
want longer term partnerships and collaborations.
I love that. I love that. How do you think that us as a culture, Black culture, we can better own our intellectual property and leverage relationships to get our just due financially from it?
So this is another area where, again, I have probably strong but fairly divergent views. And
Hmm.
the first thing I would say is we need to practice more self-love. The first thing that I don't think Black people do collectively is love each other. I think we have to start recognizing the value in ourselves, and we have to do that through the mirror of our Black humanity that faces us every day. And I'm not sure how much we embrace that. So as we succeed or as we get into certain spaces where we're making a difference, I'm not sure we look at either the dearth or the lack of the scarcity of people who look like us or the few people who do, and do we embrace them? Do we bring them with us, right? And so that self love, I think, is the first thing that I would say. I think we're way too willing sometimes to denounce each other rather than support each other. I think our
Hmm.
default should be this is someone that I'm going to trust, that I'm going to give a chance to, that I'm going to embrace, that I'm going to shop at their place, that I'm going to purchase their product because they're about the business of excellence, about Black excellence. They're going to try to do something better. And I'm just not sure that that's where we start. And I think if we start there, our collective influence becomes a very different perspective, right? I was speaking to somebody just the other day about this whole situation, like in Israel, a Jewish person,
Hmm.
and he was pointing out to me there are 15 million Jews in the entire world, right? And you think of, you put that in perspective. And then I stepped back from that and I said to him, what? But the power and influence that
Yeah.
50 million have is incredible,
It's
right?
incredible. It's
It's
incredible.
incredible. But part of it is because they have a deep belief from a religious perspective, and as a result, a deep belief and support of one another. And I think there's something in there for us as a very diverse diaspora to really step back and think
Hmm.
about the kind of power that we would have collectively as a diaspora if our default was to embrace one another and support one another. I think it could be a very powerful influence. And you're right, we already dominate the culture. Every time I go to a sporting event now, I think to myself, in 1990, would I really be hearing rap being played at the Mets Stadium or at the USO?
Right.
Right? But now, if you go and you don't hear that, you're like, "Oh, what event am I at?" Right? It's not. It's mainstream. Right? So, to your point, everybody else embraces it. Why do we, love it
Right.
for the same
Right.
people? Yeah.
No, that's so good. Yeah, and just in terms of the situation in the Middle East, I was thinking about it, and it's also the power of storytelling, and two, to have a connection to a
Mm.
homeland that some people have never been to, but have such a strong connection to a place
Yeah.
because of the oral history and the religious background that's been passed down. It's so incredibly powerful. It's so
Yeah.
powerful, and in our community where history is being taken out of schooling and things of that nature, that's what it does. It's not just learning something, it's setting the foundation for one's identity.
And that's another opportunity, right? So every time I hear about book banning and so on, and I think of people like Ta-Nehisi Coates who I've
Hmm.
hired, I think to myself, okay, I get it, right? We have states now that they're determined to push that culture and that history away. All right, I get it. However, I then think, how do we react to that? Do we wait for somebody to be in the governor's office that is going to look like us or be more apt to hear our story? Or do we go to after school programs and read to those kids the same books that are being banned? There's no law banning us from doing that. There's no law banning us from going to a public library and gathering some kids from a certain neighborhood together and doing that. So we again have an opportunity collectively to say, okay, this is your move, this is our move, and our move is going to be that we're going to embrace our own, and we're going to find ways to tell that story, right? And I think again, there's a big opportunity there for us to really push back on some of these things without getting as frustrated as I think we get presently.
With Gen Z, they often get such a bad rap. What don't we know about this generation? What don't we understand or fully appreciate about this generation and what they need to kind of thrive in their future?
Right. The first thing is that they're very altruistic, and I don't think we recognize that. And of the 5 generations in the workforce today, they're the most altruistic. They also know more about a wider variety of people who don't look like them, don't live in their same place, etc. And so their empathy for others is significant. And that's also, I think, something that's very different about them. So with that, there's a baseline that they have created of their existence that we need to fuel, right? So they're far more ready to concern themselves about the weather impact in Alaska than in their own hometown. And so there are ways that we should be looking to empower them to do that, and to recognize that that in and of itself could be the very thing that, just gives our humanity a very different experience.
Yeah, no, I know just in the discussions about the workplace, I went to an event last night about voting for the election next year. And a lot of the focus was on the youth vote and how they are really ignored. But they are so civically minded, and not just voting, but in other ways, making their voices heard and being up on the issues. And that we need to stop overlooking them and start asking them how they feel and what they think and things of that nature. So it kind of goes along with what you're saying. All right, let's switch gears to you. For you personally, when did you know it was time to go? I mean, you were just on an upward trajectory. You got all these power. You got Howard out of the financial, situation. Got it in the black. Got all these just high profile professors, all these women deans. It's on an upward trajectory, and then you say, all right, my time is done. When did you know it was time to go, and how did you make that decision?
Yeah, my decision around going was really around, again, a cultural construct I wanted to see us have. In 100 years, we have not transitioned the presidency well. Every president prior to me for 100 years has been pushed out in some way, shape, or form. And I felt it was an opportunity to stop that cycle. I felt it was an opportunity to have people see that you can transition a presidency at an HBCU, especially at Howard University, in a way that seems normal, that they could see both of us in the same room. We could meet, at his inauguration. I'm going to attend, I'm going to sit in one of the front rows and cheer him on, etc. And I think it was time for us to do that. And after 10 years, I felt that one, transitioning to presidency was probably the next best thing that I could do for the university, after having fixed the finances and some of the infrastructural issues, etc. And then second, it was a new season for me. It was an opportunity for me to be open to a new season. I feel like I've lived my life in decades at a time, and there's another decade upon me to do something different, and open to what that might be.
Yeah. So what version of yourself have you not realized?
I would say one of the things that I wouldn't say I haven't realized it, but one of the things that I wanted back after this experience was the joy. This was, like I said, being an alum, this was more vocation than job. And as a result, I think I took on things in a very different way, in terms of being probably overly stressed about them because I felt the stakes were so high. This is such a special place to me, and seeing it do well. And that can sometimes rob you of your joy, to be quite honest. Mm-hmm. And so this next season is just about finding that joy. I feel like everything else I've done in those prior decades, I was always joyous about it. I had an incredible enthusiasm about the next day, and nothing was burdensome. I think to some extent I carried a lot of weight over the past 10 years,
Mhm.
emotional and mental weight, psychological, to just make sure that this works. Because anything that else would be unacceptable. And this next phase, I think, is going to be back to being, that joyous, having that joyous spirit in me.
So is there anything, I don't know, have you settled on your next best thing, or are you still kind of navigating what that could look like?
Not yet. I'm still navigating.
Yeah.
I'm back operating more. I never stopped operating, but I'm
Mhm.
up operating more. I'm spending, time with students and residents in the hospital, making rounds, which I love. I love teaching, and even this morning, being with the students and residents, seeing their faces light up as something very complicated they thought they'd never understand, they understood it. I mean, those are the simple joys now. This evening I'll get to go watch my daughter play volleyball for her school. My son is going to be here tomorrow. Gonna hang out with him a little bit over the weekend. Watch some soccer with him, etc. So cooked dinner last night with my daughter. I mean, it's the simple things in life.
Yeah.
I think sometimes that is bringing that joy for me right now.
Oh, that's fantastic. What are you most proud of for yourself? I know, like, there are all these lists, but for you, what are you most proud of in terms of what you've been able to do with your life, as a man from, you're still so young. But coming from Trinidad and Tobago, like, what you've been able to do is fantastic. But what are you proud of for yourself?
Yeah, I'd say the number one thing is fairly simple. I lost my dad a month shy of my third birthday,
Mm.
and being a father, I think, was the most important thing to me. And so, being a father to my two kids, my 19-year-old son and my 17-year-old daughter, I think is a pinnacle for me. Now, they obviously will be the judges of whether or not I've done that well or not, but that's the thing that, in my opinion, gives me the most fulfillment, the most joy. Even reading my daughter's college essay, and the theme of it and the focus around my presidency, but her quotes about me saying to them that regardless of what they do in life, I want them to be nice to people. The fact that that still resonates with them as they enter young adulthood
Yeah.
really feels good to me, and is very, very satisfying.
Yeah, they were listening. Even though you thought they weren't taking it in, they were listening. They were listening.
Absolutely.
The last segment that we always do with every guest is called the Act Up segment, ACT. Those are my initials. And really just asking, people could listen to this and they're gleaning a lot from it, but then they're like, well, I'm not a president of a university. I didn't go to Howard. And just really, they're trying to crystallize, how do I get from where I am to where I want to be? What steps can I take today to put me on that trajectory? What would you say?
Yeah, so the first thing is that you have to really believe in yourself and believe in the fact that you're participating in a wider humanity, but with a very, very important mark to lay down. And then once you recognize that, I think the second thing is to recognize that everything you do in selfless service to benefit others will always come back to you in spades. And I think the service of our humanity, the amplification of other people's humanity, ultimately is our calling, regardless of what we get into, whether it's finance, education, it doesn't matter. The pandemic taught us that, right? Look at the people we probably totally were invisible to us as we went about our daily lives, and how dependent we were on them. And we are still, and we have been for so long. They just got an opportunity to be spotlighted. And so, regardless of what you do, I think you've got to recognize that opportunity. And then the last thing is, I'm obsessed about the journey of life, because I don't think there's any destination you'll come upon that'll completely fulfill you. And so, I think not letting the day to day become mundane, but
Mhm.
going after it with enthusiasm and all the energy possible, so that at night when you lay down, you can ask yourself, what didn't I do? What would I have done differently? And get up the next day and make sure that you execute on both of those.
Thank you so much for doing this and just for your insight and for your service, really. It was just during such a crucial time. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.